Now here's my question. Oh, it's actually similar. If Jesus is the God who inspired the Old Testament, why did he command Moses and Joshua to kill women and children? Why did he command that? And when is the killing of children morally justifiable?
Well, I think that's a good question. I'm not sure I could answer it in 3 minutes. And nor can I say that this is the official Christian position. I can say what we're dealing with, though. As far as issues like this bothering me, I think you and I are different. You look at all of these issues I bring up and it's just a smokescreen. This is just ridiculous. This is no objection at all. And I'm looking at it and going, whoa, this is wild. But I'm like that with the Bible, too. I'm like that with the Bible. I will say right now, there are tons of things in the Bible that really, really bother me. And the difference is I think that Christianity can actually deal with these problems. I don't think that Islam can. And I think people have seen that tonight because you've had an opportunity to answer and you keep pointing the finger at Christianity. As far as Jesus being the God of the Old Testament, here's the data we have. 1, lots of really bad things in the Old Testament. And then 2, Jesus coming along and saying, you have heard that it was said eye for eye, tooth for tooth, Old Testament. But now I tell you, love your neighbor, turn your other cheek, things of this nature.
The question I have is, looking at a lot of your content online in the past week or two, I found that seemingly, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, yeah? You seem to make a moral case for Christianity and a moral case against Islam. I watched one of your videos with someone called Ali Attai, I think his name was, and he made the point, he asked you a question, it's on the record. He said, if Jesus, and this is what we've been talking about today, is the author of the Old Testament, if Jesus is the author of the Old Testament, how can you explain all of the things which you deem as immoral? Because as a divine command theorist, I would expect you to believe that all of the things in the Old Testament, in terms of injunctions, if they had been made by Jesus, who is meant to be the author of the Old Testament, God, the triune God, would have been good. But you actually said it's bad. There are lots of bad, these are your words, there are lots of bad things in the Old Testament. Now, if Jesus is God, and he's the author of the Old Testament, and he has bad injunctions, how can you reconcile the fact that God, a maximally perfect good being, could give us bad injunctions?
Dr. Wood, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I don't recall saying bad things. I'll have to take a look at the clip.
Here's the data we have. 1, lots of really bad things in the Old Testament.
I did acknowledge that I said there are all sorts of things in the Bible that bother me. I do recall saying that. And what I mean by that is, I'm a philosopher, I'm a former atheist. And this would go for the Quran as well, when you know, things that, passages talking about hell or something like that, eternal torment, or warfare or something like that, well, those things bother me. That doesn't mean I reject that they're from God. I say, okay, those are I've noticed a mindset in Islam that if you accept Islam, you can never really think critically about it. And I can't be like that. So I'm always wrestling with issues, Old Testament and New Testament, and with the Quran as well. So as far as the moral case, if we're talking about Old Testament passages, looking at those things, yeah, I would say these things. You know, the
1 minute left.
Entering the land of Canaan and fighting the Canaanites and so on. Those things, they make me wonder sometimes. But if you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, then you have to say, okay, if Jesus rose from the dead, then if I'm going to listen to anyone tell me about God, I'm going to listen to Jesus. And so if he's Lord, then, hey, if something bothers me, that's my problem. Right? That's my problem. That's something I have to wrestle with. God accepts that we have to wrestle with things. The Psalms are filled with people really, really wondering why certain things are happening. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't think God thinks it's a bad thing when we look at something and go, oh, that's really rough. Now I really want to think about that. So I don't see that as any big problem if something bothers me, but I'm convinced that I have good reasons to believe in Christianity, then
10 seconds.
I don't really see the problem. And that's why I would still accept it, because Jesus rose from the dead.
Thank you, Dr. Wood.
It would say something to the effect of, go into any city and slaughter their women and children, just like the Bible says. By the standards of the Bible, I can't accept that Moses was a prophet then. I do not believe a prophet would kill women and children. Never. Now, Mr. Wood completely ignored my question. He's saying that's what the Old Testament said, and then we have Jesus coming. That was Jesus, according to Christian orthodoxy. Unless he's a Marcionite. Maybe he's a Marcionite. Maybe he believes that God is a different God. That was Jesus telling the Israelites. He commands them. It's very clear. Arise and attack the Midianites. Kill their women. Only the young girls for yourselves. This is, according to the Talmud, this is how the Jews took that inspiration from Jesus to rape 3-year-old girls. And there's no reproach in the Bible about what God does. No, that's not what I meant. So he has a lot of sophistry. He's a philosopher, so he's dancing around the issue.
On the other hand, I think that Jay, while he has admitted that the violence in the Old Testament is much greater than in the Quran, and these are his words, which I've written down as soon as he spoke them, he seems to think that the New Testament presents a different picture of morality, and we should guard against this. He brought me actually greetings from our good friend James White, and James White has written in his book, The God Who Justifies, on page 61, in response to those Christians who may think, okay, that was the God of the Old Testament, now in the New Testament things are different. In response, White has this to say: there is only one God, and the God of the Old Testament is identical in every way to the God of the New. So we cannot look at two different moralities here. Why is the New Testament then different? In his article on jihad in the Blackwell Companion to the Quran, the Jewish writer Reuben Firestone explains the situation in which both the Talmud and the New Testament were written. Here we're talking about the context. Now the context here was different. The New Testament and the Talmud were written at a time when Rome dominated, and there was no hope, either from among the Jews or from among the Christians, that somehow a political struggle will result in any victory. So a passive approach was taken. And this is particularly in page number 313 of the Blackwell Companion to the Quran, in which Reuben Firestone has laid out this case. And one can see this to be true. Jesus, according to the New Testament, was the Messiah who was expected to rule on the throne of David. So that the verse that was quoted about this says that God said to him, "Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." The imagery was that Jesus would sit in a political rule on a throne that was left vacant by David, and that God would have it such that Jesus would be resting his feet on the slain bodies of his enemies. It was to be a political battle, a military confrontation. But when that could not work, the New Testament writers, writing in a milieu in which they dared not be represented as the terrorists of their day, they wrote things like Romans 13 and 1 Peter, in which it is entirely pacifist. You submit yourself to the ruling authority of the day, do not resist. And this is why Jesus is represented in the Gospel of John as saying, "My kingdom is not of this world." So this is a later rewriting. John, the last of the four Gospels, now takes the Messiahship and gives it a different meaning. It's not anymore about sitting on the throne of David in this life, at least not in the first coming, but when he comes back, the book of Revelation tells us what he will do. He will have a major confrontation with his enemy. His tongue itself will be of a sword, and he will slay everyone except the false prophet and the Antichrist, who will be thrown into the fire. Everyone else, according to the book of Revelation, will be slain by Jesus when he comes back and engages the enemy in that major battle. So the battle motif is present in the Old and in the New Testament. Christians are peaceful, but despite the Bible. And some Muslims are violent, but despite the teachings of the Quran. Thank you.